Good afternoon, colleagues. We are about to begin our teacher workshop. I would like to give persons just a few more minutes, probably about 3 more minutes to log on, and then we will start. So we're going to begin in another 3 to 4 minutes. And then, so we're giving persons a little bit more time to come on. In another 3 to 4 minutes, we'll begin our session. Good afternoon, colleagues, fellow colleagues. We are about to begin. I want to welcome all of us here this afternoon. Want to welcome those on the YouTube platform, as well as those of you here on Zoom. This afternoon, our workshop, Improving Assessment Practices through the Interpretation of Curriculum Objectives and the Alignment of Tasks with the DOK Levels. Your hosts for this afternoon session are Mrs. Janice Simpson-Hales and yours truly, Itania Johnson. As with any event, we would like to invite the presence of the Lord with us. And so at this time, I'm going to invite Mrs. Simpson-Hales to open in prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. Let us pray. Most righteous and heavenly Father God, we want to thank you for sparing our lives to see this day. We place this presentation in your hands. We pray that it will be beneficial to the teachers and to the schools to which they are employed. We pray that as they leave this session, they'll be able to take with them what they would have learned today and be able to implement in their schools. Thank you again for your many blessings. Be with us all. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mrs. Hales, for that.
So now we're going to break the ice. All right. You know, with every presentation, we want to just get off to a little start there where we get the brains ticking. So this session is no different. So here's a little task that I'm inviting you to think about, and then you can share your responses in the chat. All right. So a man walked home after having been out with friends. He walked down the middle of a deserted country road. There were no street lights to illuminate the road, and there was no moonlight. He was dressed in all black. Suddenly, a car that did not have its headlights on came racing around the road. At the last moment, the driver of the car saw the man and swerved to avoid him. How was the driver able to see the man? Share your thoughts in the chat. How was the driver able to see the man? What are you thinking? So I'm coming over to the chat, and I'm seeing persons are typing their names and school. That's very good. Thank you. Somebody says, Jodine Harrison says it was daytime. Interesting response. Is there anyone else who would like to share? The man smiled, so his teeth that went past when his teeth showed. Thank you for that bit of humor. Somebody says his eyes, somebody says moonlight. All right, there's a lot of creativity coming out in these responses, Ms. Johnson. It did indicate that it was night, so I think it was in the day. It did not indicate. All right, very good. So we have a bunch of teachers who are clicking today, Ms. Johnson, and are on the ball. They are indeed thinking. Good. So he was actually returning home in the middle of the day. So that's the correct response. All right. Thank you so much for your participation. So we're moving into the rationale for today's session. Why did we call you all together today to have this session? What do we hope to achieve? So we really want to provide the support needed for the interpretation of objectives, because this is critical as we seek to implement the curriculum. And we also would like to look at the identification and creation of tasks at various DOK levels to improve assessment practices. And consequently, that leads us then to our main objectives for today. Because the session now seeks to identify the content, context, and complexity of objectives, We also want to develop an understanding of web's depth of knowledge, and we want to identify and create tasks at various DOK levels. So looking forward to having you interacting with us during this session, mainly in the chat, but interacting with us so that we can tell whether or not you are indeed learning from this session. All right, so let's jump right in.
What are we preparing our students for? Let's talk. Let me get your ideas. Let me get your thoughts. What is it that we are really preparing our students for? Colleagues, we send our children to school 5 days a week for X number of years. But really, why do we do it? What are we really preparing them for?
Tracy and Bennett Platt says future life in the chat. Future life. All right, thanks for that response. Chrisanne says to be fully functional individuals in society. Very good.
Anybody else?
Not yet. But I think so far these are some good responses.
All right, great. Now that we have that little talk and we have a little idea or some knowledge of what it is that we are preparing our students for, we are going to share with you a little video that will add further context to our discussion, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Imagine a world where citizens communicate constructively in different social situations and understand different viewpoints and perspectives. A world where citizens adapt to change readily, manage their goals and their time, and are self-directed learners who interact effectively with others. How can we achieve such a world?
A world now demands citizens who can think critically, process information and make discoveries, interpret and analyze results, reason through problem solving effectively, construct arguments and solve problems, and think systematically.
Our world demands citizens who can think creatively, work creatively with others, and implement innovations. The world requires persons who can reason effectively and evaluate the evidence presented before them. Our world requires citizens who can solve problems and articulate their findings. The world requires persons who are self-motivated and have a positive appreciation for learning, and they are adaptable and flexible.
Our world requires persons who can interact effectively with others and work efficiently in diverse teams. Persons who can prioritize, plan, and manage projects.
Our world also requires persons who can assess and evaluate information effectively, use and manage this information, and apply technology efficiently. You see, our world requires persons who are open to new ideas, information, tools, and ways of thinking. Persons who can use ICT accurately, creatively, ethically, and legally. Persons who are aware of these social and cultural differences and incorporate them in their daily lives. Persons who essentially are able to apply technology appropriately and effectively.
Are we preparing students who can survive in such a world? Colleague, are we preparing students who can survive in such a world? That's the question we're asking. And if yes, why? And what's the whole purpose of our preparation for our students? So just a little bit more in terms of discussing. Let's see your response in the chat.
All right, so we haven't gotten a response just yet. I know they would have been processing quite a bit of information from that video clip. So we're just awaiting in the chat for you to share with us, based on the video that you just saw briefly, the scope of what you envision will be required for students to survive in such a world. What are some of the key components you got from the video that they will need for survival? All right, not yet. Yes, whatever we teach, we ask them to apply it to real life situations. I think that's an excellent point, Ms. Johnson. What do you think? That's
Yes,
coming from Tracy Bennett Platt.
I agree. And so just to continue the discussion, we basically notice that what the students are learning now, or what the video is saying, that prior to now, in the future, what the students are learning in terms of book knowledge, that sort of thing, it is not enough for them to be able to work or to be adequately fit for the future jobs, in the sense that the skills that came out of the video that the students need to know, and those 4 critical skills are, right, and I'm seeing it in the chat: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. So these are some of the things that we need for future jobs. And so it is that with the current book knowledge, or because the book knowledge just requires them to know things, and they are not given the opportunity to actually apply, what we need now to do is to prepare our students to be able to use these skills, or to apply these skills for future. Example, if we give something just addition of fractions, or we want the students to add fractions, that's just basically drill and practice. But in order for them to be able to use this later on for future job, or whatever it is that they're going to be doing in the future, it means therefore that we now need to put it to real life situation, where we're going to have the students be able to add the fractions in terms of what it is that they are doing at that particular moment, what it is that they are doing for that particular job or skill. Looking at in a restaurant, looking at, all of those different business aspects where fractions may come in, for them to be able to apply the skill of being taught how to add fractions. Now, coming from that discussion and coming from the video, the big question that I would like to ask: why would we assess? Why do we assess? And again, colleagues, I want you to type your responses in the chat. Why is it that we give tests? Why is it that we give assessment? Why is it that we give assignments? Why do we assess?
So as we await the responses for the teachers, just want to welcome persons who are just coming in from the various schools. Thank you so much for joining. And Andrea Bartley says, to ascertain students' strengths and weaknesses. Response to why do we assess?
Okay. Anybody else wants to comment before?
Yes,
Right.
Samoy says to know, oh, this moved a little bit too fast. To know where our students are to plan for the next lesson. Ms. Layla says for reinforcement. And the responses are coming in to plan for intervention, to evaluate what students have learned and how best teacher, that left me to evaluate what students have learned and how best to see if the students have grasped the content. There's also another response to see the students' progress and also to ascertain to what extent the students grasp the concepts, a measure of the strategies. We just have a plethora of responses here, Ms. Johnson. I'm not able to keep up with all of them. Also, in addition to provide valuable feedback, that's also good to help us prepare for them more effectively or efficiently. A number of responses coming in, Ms. Johnson.
And indeed, everyone, you're all correct. And I really appreciate your responses. Good going, colleagues. Now, in addition to all your thoughts, we have what is called the NSE. And also to add to all of that, we test to measure achievements against standards, which is linked to the world we would prepare our students for. Now, colleagues, we test to measure against the standard, and all of this came out in the video. And this was why you were able to tell me about the skills and preparing for the future. In addition to that, we have the world in which we are preparing our students is embodied by the NSC and its standards. And we know the National Standards Curriculum is what we base our teaching and learning experiences from. And colleagues, we also know that the NSC was designed to meet the skills of the growing world. And also, if you notice that one of the things that we are pushing within the learning, teaching and learning period, or the teaching and learning of students, is to enhance student-centered learning. So the NSC was developed specifically for that, and where the teachers would now act as facilitators to facilitate students' development of their own thoughts, development and experiment and exploration of these thoughts, and to come up with their solution to problems given. So, in addition, we all know that the objectives are there as a guide to what is to be covered within the curriculum. And as a result, we have to assess or evaluate to see if the desired outcome has been achieved. And so, based on this, I want us now to look at the following objectives to see whether or not the accompanying assessment items would determine if they align to the given objectives. So again, colleagues, we're going to participate by typing in the chat to say whether or not the assessment item is in alignment to the objective that is given. Now, this is a grade 2 objective, which states, solve problems involving addition and subtraction of whole numbers. So that's our objective. Let's look at the task for this objective. John had 350 marbles. His friend Mark gave him another 200 marbles. How many marbles does he have in all? Colleagues, let me hear your responses. Is this, so it's simple, yes or no. You're going to type that in the chat to say, all right, yes, this task is in alignment to the objective, or no, it's not in alignment with the objective. All right, what's happening in the chat, Mrs. Hales?
Yes, we are seeing a number of yeses coming in. Yes, it is in alignment with the objectives.
All right, let me ask, even though it's not there, but look at the objective. It says solve problems involving addition and subtraction of whole numbers. Look at the question again, or the assessment item. How would we address this or ensure that it is actually testing the objective?
Someone says, Ms. Platt says no.
But I want to hear why.
All right, Ms. Platt, can you share with us as to why you say no? Looks like she's changing her answer to yes.
All right, colleagues, we all agree, yes, this objective is in alignment to this assessment task is in alignment with the objective. And even though another solution to this too, even though the objective only says addition, the teacher may have one task that speaks to addition and another task that speaks to subtraction, or a task could have both addition and subtraction being a part of that item. Okay, let's look at this one. Same grade 2, same objective, solve problems involving addition and subtraction of whole numbers. And the other task is, what number must be added to 145 to make 230? What number must be added to 145 to make 230? Is this task aligned to the objective? Man, the chat just lighting up. Go ahead, Mrs. Hales.
A number of yeses again for this one. Everyone saying yes, 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 all the way, Ms. Johnson.
All right, good. So indeed, yes. This one also aligns or speaks to the objective given. And we can see that because in order for the answer to be achieved, you'd have to do some sort of subtraction. Let's look at another objective. This one is taken from grade 4. It says, compute the perimeter of regular and irregular polygons using units of measurement for lengths. All right. So here's the assessment item. Calculate the perimeter and area of the following shape. What do you think about this one? Is it speaking to the objective? Is it aligned to the objective? Is it a task that the students would be able to complete?
Seeing a number of yeses in the chat. Everybody
Okay.
so far is saying yes, Ms. Johnson.
All right. Okay, colleagues. Before I give you the answer, well, I'm seeing
Ms. Kelly Bailey saying no. Ms. Binns, Gordon Binns, Mrs. Binns says no. Ms. Hutchinson says not grade 1. There's an interesting answer from Ms. Jodine Harrison. Area is not a part of the objective.
very good, great. Good job, colleagues. And so this was what I wanted us all to do, to look back at the objective. It says, compute the perimeter of regular and irregular polygons using units of measurement for length. Now, the objective does not speak to area. It speaks to perimeter. And so therefore, where we would have given a student this diagram or this shape to calculate both the area and the perimeter. And I'm also seeing where somebody pointed out in one of the chats that the measurements too would not have been given, because we can see clearly that only one side of the shape is the measurement for the shape is given. And so it would require the students now to come up with something else. What would be all of those things? So this question is not in alignment to the objective given. All right. Let's look at this other question. Same objective. A rectangular flower garden has a perimeter of 24 meters. What could be the possible lengths of the sides? A rectangular flower garden has a perimeter of 24 meters. What could be the possible lengths of the sides?
So far, I'm seeing yes. Yes again. Yes. A lot of yeses coming in. Miss Bailey says no. Mrs. Bailey says no. Miss Bailey, would you like to share why you said no? Can type briefly in the chat. All right, she's not going to share, Miss Johnson, not at this time. But Miss Littleton said yes. So we still have some yeses coming in, which are, there's still one or two no's there. But we'd love to hear from the persons who said no in this case as well, if you'd like to type. But failing that, well, Ms. Manning says no, this requires division. All right, so Ms. Manning says no because it requires division. All right, Ms. Johnson.
Oh, well, looking at the question, it requires, you're saying it requires division. Also, the fact is that we are assuming with a question like this, the thought purposes of this would have been for students to find basically what sums would give us 24. So we talk about perimeter being the distance around a particular shape or figure or whatever the shape is at that particular time. And so we're saying that normally we would be adding the total or finding the total distance around the given shape. So if it is that a question like this is given, even though it says rectangular, we're going to want to assume or probably divide. We're also looking for sums. We're still looking at the fact that the students would have known what perimeter is, how to calculate the perimeter. And so we are now assuming or thinking or expecting them to use sums that would give a total of 24. And they would also use their idea, their knowledge of the whole rectangular, the whole properties of a rectangle in order to achieve this. So
Sorry, Ms. Johnson. Yes, I was just thinking there's another element to this that we could just highlight as well, is that the objective is being tested by this question, but at a different level. And as we go into the presentation, we'll talk about the different levels, but that's in keeping with what you're saying, Ms. Johnson.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And thank you, colleagues. Now, let's delve a little deeper into the objectives. Teachers, do you know that objectives have parts? Can anyone quickly type what the parts of an objectives are if you know them? Or if you have some idea, at least one of them or two of them or all of the parts, can you let us know quickly?
Nothing yet in the chat, Miss. Just waiting for feedback. All right, somebody says condition. Somebody says context, complexity, content. Somebody says criteria, degree, measure. Audience, content, complexity, and context from Patrice Lindo. Latoya Manning says smart. Objective should be smart. Cassandra Lewis Barrett says behavior. All right, so those are the responses, Ms. Johnson.
And I must say, excellent job. And yes, you are indeed correct. And somebody still adding smart. Very good. So the parts of the objective we're looking at is content, context, and complexity. So those 3 C's. Now, content. What do we mean by content? This is what students are required to learn. Complexity. How deeply should they understand this context? And the context. What should students be able to do with this content? Again, the content is what students are required to learn. Complexity, how deeply they should understand this content. And the context, what should students be able to do with the content? Now let's explore this a little further by decomposing the objectives. So here, we're going to circle the content, underline the complexity, and draw a rectangle around the context. Let's go to the task. So this objective says, differentiate between the use of addition and multiplication, subtraction and division in problem situations involving whole numbers. Differentiate between the use of addition and multiplication, subtraction and division in problem situations involving whole numbers. Now, based on what it is that we just said, the content in this case would be addition and multiplication, subtraction and division. The complexity. So before I even go, let me just put a little explanation. So the content is what the children are to learn. So we're going to be teaching addition. We're going to be teaching multiplication. We're going to be teaching subtraction, and we're going to be teaching division. So this is what we're going to be teaching. Now, what is it that we want the children to be able to do with this knowledge? We want them to be able to differentiate when to use or differentiate between the use of. And so that will be the complexity of the objective. Now, the context in which this objective will be tested is in problem situations involving whole numbers. So whatever problem situations that are given, that would be what the students or the context. So you're giving it to them in problem situations. Let's look at another example. Use linear programming techniques to graphically solve problems involving 2 variables. Use linear programming techniques to graphically solve problems involving 2 variables. Again, we have to think of what is it that we want the students to learn. So they have to learn about linear programming techniques. So that will be our content. Now, the complexity is this problems involving 2 variables. And the context will be for them to solve problems. I hope we're understanding. Do we have any questions so far? All right. Let's try another one. Add and subtract fractions with the same denominator up to 12. Add and subtract fractions with the same denominator up to 12. So what would be our content? Of course, add and subtract fractions. That's what we're going to be teaching. Our complexity with the same denominator up to 12. Colleagues, notice we have no context here, but that doesn't mean that you in your own class can't come up with the context for the students to be able to use. What context do you want them to be able to add and subtract fractions? It may be from worded problems, it may be from real life situations. So you in this case can determine what the context would be. Now, based on that, let's give it a try. Now, remember, when you look at the task, whatever the content is, you're going to give it a circle. You're going to underline the complexity and draw a rectangle around the context. You won't be able to do that on screen, no, but you can share which one you circled for the content, which one you underlined for complexity, and which one you had a rectangle around for the context. And all this you will do in the chat. So let's look at this grade 2 objective. It says, compare, estimate, and measure distances using non-standard units, such as handspan. Compare, estimate, and measure distances using non-standard units, such as handspan. So let's see the responses coming in the chat. What would be our content? What would be our complexity? And what would be our context? Any new information in the chat?
Not yet. I'm sure they're thinking it through. So again, it's the content, complexity, and all right, we're seeing some responses coming in the chat. So it's the content, complexity, and the context. So
Yes.
compare, estimate, and measure is the content. It's going so fast. So a lot of persons have responded in terms of content. So maybe we could relate to that. So the content is compare, estimate, and measure. That's the feedback so far. All right, can we look at complexity? Can you type what is the complexity now? So we're taking those. So the complexity is handspan, says Ms. Lorraine. All right, so we have one complexity response so far. Any other responses regarding complexity? All right, we are seeing Mrs. Platt saying using handspan. All right, good. And then let us hear now in terms of the context. The context. What context do you see in this objective? All right, so we're looking at context now. All right, so somebody says context is handspan. All right. Somebody says context is non-standard units. All right. So we have some responses coming in. Somebody else says complexity is non-standard measurement. Somebody else says complexity is using non-standard measurement units such as handspan. All right, so there's quite a bit of interesting responses, Ms. Johnson.
Okay.
So let's help them to concretize.
All right. Now, colleagues, let's look at the objective. It says, compare, estimate, and measure distances using non-standard units such as handspan. What is it that we want the students? So what is it that we want the students to learn? We want the students to compare. We want them to be able to estimate, and we want them to be able to measure. So this is what we're going to be working with them to do. So that would be our content. Now, in what setting would we want? What's the complexity? What is it that we want them under what conditions? We want them to be able to use non-standard units such as handspan. So that's our complexity. Now, under what context would we want the students to be able to compare, estimate, and measure? We want them to be measuring distances. Now, remember, the context could have been volume, the context could have been length. In this case, specifically, we want them to be able to measure distances. So good job to all those. And I hope now, based on this, you would be able to move into the next objective. So let's look at the second one. Express simple sentences and word problems as algebraic expressions. Express simple sentences and word problems as algebraic expressions. Let's go to the next. We're looking at the next item, everyone. And so it is, same thing. Which one would be content? Which one would be complexity? Which one is context?
All right. So we're awaiting the responses for content. What do you think is the content in this case? Giving them a little time to think. And I'm sure they're thinking, Ms. Johnson. All right. All right, so the fingers are typing now. All right, not yet. So again, the objective: express simple sentences and word problems as algebraic expressions. So Miss Barrett says, all right, that one passed me. Chrisann Littleton says content is express simple sentences. Miss Gray says content is express simple sentences and word problems. Let me go up a little to give some of the other responses. Content, express simple expressions. Content, express simple expressions and word problems. Content, again, express simple sentence. So we're getting some feedback. All right, thank you so much. Let's look at complexity. All right, so type what you think the complexity is in the chat. Complexity, problems as algebraic expressions, says Ms. Reed. Ms. Scarlett says express simple sentences is the complexity. All right, so we have 2 feedback for that so far. Any other for complexity? What do you think? How complex is this problem? How far should they take it? Somebody says word problems is the context, right? Word problems is the content. All right. So we're getting some persons to respond. Complexity, algebraic expression. Complexity as algebraic expression. All right. So we're getting some good responses here that we just want to concretize for everyone. So we're now at content. Okay.
Even before it is revealed, we want to remember what is it that we are teaching the students? What's the focus of what is it that we want them to leave with? We, based on this, it says express simple sentences and word problems as algebraic expressions. So let's see the reveal, Mrs. Hales.
Sure.
Now, we want the students to have a grasp or to learn about algebraic expressions. So that's the content that we are teaching. We're teaching algebraic expressions. Now, under what complexity are we teaching algebraic expressions? We're teaching them to be able to use simple sentences and word problems and turn these into algebraic expressions. Now, the context that we're using it is express. So we're expressing, we want them to be able to express what is it that we want them to express, and express simple sentences and word could also form a part of the form a part of the context. So the bottom line is that we're looking at the conditions under which we want the students to come up with algebraic expressions. It must be from simple sentences and word problems. What do we want them to do with this? We want them to be able to express these as algebraic expressions. Let's take a final look at this. So the bottom line is, colleagues, that we want to think of what it is. One, think of what it is that we're doing, what we're teaching. Think of the conditions under which we're teaching it and how it is that we want them to be able to do this. All right, so let's look at this one. It says, substitute a number for a variable in a mathematical sentence with up to 2 variables. Substitute a number for a variable in a mathematical sentence with up to 2 variables. What's our content? What's our complexity? And what's our context? All right, so I've seen persons on the chat.
Yes, somebody says content is substitute. Ms. Gray says substitute a number is the context. And Mrs. Platt also agrees in terms of substitute. All right, so we're getting some feedbacks quite quickly now. Let's take the context. Context. Oh, Miss Gray said substitute a number is the context. Sorry about that. Ms. Littleton says the content is substitute. Ms. Gray says the context is substitute. All right, let's take the complexity. Let's hear what you think the complexity is for this objective. And I'm hearing the fingers typing and I'm about to get a response, Ms. Johnson. We're just being patient. All right, so reading the objective again, substitute a number for a variable in a mathematical sentence with up to 2 variables. All right, so number for a variable is complexity, says Ms. Reed. Ms. Lorraine, waiting for the complexity. Tell us what you think the complexity is. All right, so we have somebody who just said, let me just smash the whole thing all together. So Ms. Lindo says the content is substitute a number for a variable. The context is mathematical sentence, and the complexity is up to 2 variables. All right, thank you for that response, Ms. Lindo. Ms. Lorraine says with up to 2 variables is the complexity. All right, so we have something to go off here, Ms. Johnson.
So one of the things I'm happy for is that we're able to look back at this presentation. And so it is that we need to really familiarize ourselves. We're looking at what is it. Remember, the content is what we want the students to learn. So in this instance, we want them to learn how to substitute. That's what we're going to be teaching them. And the context under which we're going to be teaching them is they should be able to substitute a number for a variable in a mathematical sentence. The complexity for this with up to 2 variables. So we can allow them to start off with 1 variable, then we move up to 2 variables. But the point is, or the objective is stating that we should be teaching substitution. What is it that we want them to substitute? We want them to substitute a number for a variable in a mathematical sentence. And we want them to be able to do this with up to 2 variables. Colleagues, decomposing the objectives is not easy, and it takes practice. So because our time is short and limited, it's good we have the recording, we have the YouTube, so you can always go back and watch the video, and you can always look at it to see, and then start practicing among yourselves, looking at your objective, looking at what it is that you're going to be teaching as the content, looking at the complexity under the condition and the context. How is it that they are going to arrive at this? Or how is it they are going to come to be able to do the suggested content? So we're moving in now to our next segment, which is levels of questioning.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. All right, so let's look at levels of questioning. Have you heard of levels of questioning before? Type yes or no in the chat. Levels of questioning. What is this all about? All
So
right.
Malik Lorraine is saying no, and I'm seeing yes coming in. Quite a number of yeses, Mrs. Hales.
All right, great. All right. So when we talk about levels of questioning, it's always tied to Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. How deeply should students understand the concepts that they are to learn? So it's really a scale of cognitive rigor for assessments, because as we look at assessing the knowledge of students, we want to see to what extent have they learned and to what depth do they have an understanding of the concepts, and there are different levels. So at level 1, it's recall and reproduction, where the students are able to recall what it is you would have shared, and they're able to reproduce it as the way in which it was shared with them. So it's the most basic level because it's really requiring them to regurgitate what it is that they would have been exposed to. So they got the content and they can tell you what the content is. All right, then we take it a little further and we can talk about when they recall definitions and so on. So at level 1, its emphasis is on facts and recall of previously taught content. And it's a combination of level 1 and it does not increase in complexity. Doesn't go far out of what it is you have shared with them. And the task may be difficult without requiring deep knowledge. You know, you can have a question with a number of parts, but it's still the same basic thing. So for example, you'd ask them to define something or to draw. In one part, you ask them to define. In another part, you ask them to draw. They can describe, they can tell, they can use, and so on. So these are some of the terms that are associated with level 1 way of thinking. All right. And then we move to level 1, still we're here. And let's just look at an item then that we could consider to be a level 1 question. And we're going to be focused on this objective at the grade 2 level. Add 3 2-digit numbers without renaming. So that's our objective. We want them to be able to add. What are they going to add? 2-digit numbers. And how are they going to do that? They should not have to rename anything. All right, so it's straightforward addition. All right, so let's look at this question. So is the question achieving the objective? Do we have 2-digit numbers here? Are they required to add these 2-digit numbers? Will they be required to do renaming? No. So it's a simple question. It's a DOK 1 where they're just going to be utilizing the knowledge or facts that they have of what addition is about. And of course, they would have been familiar with their 10s and 1s. So they know how to set the numbers out and arrange them so that they can do their addition and so on. So they're not utilizing many skills per se. They're just applying the facts that they were taught. All right. Any comments on this item in the chat as a level 1 item? So you're okay with this as level 1? All right.
Yes, persons that Mrs. Lorraine is saying yes.
All right, great. So it's level 1.
Persons are saying yes.
Great. So let's look now at level 2. What does level 2 entail? So here at level 2, it's where they're going to be using the skills and the concepts associated with the topic. All right, so they're going to be applying these skills to a particular field and they can make decisions on how to approach a question or problem. So the task will require a little bit deeper knowledge other than just basic definitions, and they can understand the relationship between the different ideas that they're working with, so they can apply, they can calculate, they can classify and display, they can compare, they can extend, they can model something, they can solve problems, they can summarize, and so on, and they can use context clues and so on. All right, so let's look at an item that could be regarded as level 2 for this same objective. All right, so here, it requires a little bit more for the students to do now. because what it is saying to them is, now you have two numbers. You need to find that third number such that the sum is 80. So it requires a little bit more thought now, because a child who has an understanding of the content can recognize that in order for me to be able to get to 80, I need to count on, or if this grade 2 child is very good with manipulating addition and subtraction, then they could do the reverse, you know. But for the most part, they would have to now recognize that I need to continue counting, or what do I need to add to what I already have such that my total is 80. And this requires a little bit more thinking than just doing the straightforward addition. All right, so that's our level 2 task for the same objective. And then we look at level 3, which is more of strategic thinking now. They have to have a good understanding of the content and the concepts and skills associated with it, so that they can now go really in depth with what you're being required to do. So in this case, they should be able to critique, they can infer, they can justify, they can also solve, they can check for it, they can double check their work, they can cite evidence and explain and so on. So the focus is on reasoning and planning in order to respond. They don't just have to go straight forward into a rote approach. You know, they have to think about it. They should be able to demonstrate a deep understanding and also give feedback as to why they decided to do the things the way they decided to do it. So we really want to get, as we're talking about getting students prepared for the world of work, it means that all these levels of thinking, they should be able to function at these levels, because different job requirements will require them to function at different levels, and they should be flexible enough to be able to adjust based on the situations that they're placed in. All right, so let's see. It says same objective, add 3 two-digit numbers with or without renaming. And this is now our DOK 3, depth of knowledge 3. Can you see now why? Because previously we had given them what they should work with. In the first case, we told them everything. Second case, we gave them something and they have to figure out the rest. In this case, a child has to have a thorough understanding to recognize that you have a lot of different numbers that are two-digit numbers that you can add to give you 80. And so it's an open question, because here it is extending their scope for them to recognize that it's not only 3 sets of numbers that I can add to get 80. So they now are able to explore widely, so they can give all the possible answers they can come up with that would still give them a sum of 80. So this has broadened their scope quite a bit. And that is really what the DOK 3 is about, broadening their scope, getting them to think, analyze, and so on. Why would this work? Why would that not work? You know, if I put a single-digit number in the mix, would I be achieving my objective, and so on, based on what I'm supposed to do? I'm supposed to be using two-digit numbers without renaming. So it broadens their scope quite a bit, even at that level. And then the level 4, which is something we encourage, but it's not normally as evident as possible in our regular planning, is the extended reasoning. This is where you give them something that they can work on as a project or do outside of class, that they can take home and monitor something over time and get a chance to really engross themselves in all the concepts relating to what was being taught. So it's not necessarily targeted at a specific objective per se, but it's a collection of objectives that they would have already explored that now come together in a combined form for them to carry out an activity to demonstrate their understanding of these objectives. So the tasks at this level require complex reasoning, planning, and thinking. And the activities tend to have multiple steps, and students may be asked to relate concepts within the content area or among other content areas, because it may not just be fixed at math. It could be something else they're doing in social studies that they're bringing into math, or something else that they're doing in language arts that some way relates to what they're doing in math and so on. And they will have to apply that knowledge set in order to carry out this task or activity. All right, so here's a task, for example, that could be a level 4 task. Breakfast at Brianna. So you could provide students with a price list of raw materials that could be used to make breakfast. Allow the students in groups to select items that they would use to create a breakfast of their choice. And you can provide them with a spending limit of $100. So whatever it is that they have chosen from the list cannot exceed the amount of money that they have. Do you see why this task can be a level 4? Share with me in the chat what you think, how you think students would manage this task. It's not necessarily tied to the objective that we were looking at before in terms of 2-digit numbers and so on, but it has broadened the scope based on they can use those 2-digit numbers as well, but in this aspect, they're employing their knowledge of varying aspects of their experience to be able to carry out this investigation. Share with me in the chat your thoughts on this DOK 4 question. And do you see why this is at DOK 4? And can this be useful in your classrooms? This is something that you may not do every class, but say once per month, you give them an activity like this that would be a combination of the tasks or ideas that they would have explored during that period of time, so they can apply and utilize their knowledge. All right, because as we're looking at it, we really want to get students beyond the level 1, where they're just defining and just regurgitating what it is that we have shared. We want them to assimilate the information, make it their own, and be able to utilize it in different contexts. And that is why, even in looking at the objectives, exposing students to different contexts is important, because when students are exposed to a particular content in just limited number of contexts, when they are tested at an external level and the same content is in other contexts, sometimes they're not able to make that connection between the concept that they are required to utilize in solving the problem based on the context that the problem is presented in. So it's very important for us to pay keen attention to decomposing the objectives, creating contexts where they do not exist in the objective, or utilize the context based on the objectives that they were given, so that students have a variety of experience coming out of our classroom environments. All right. So moving on, we're looking now at, can we modify tasks to meet different DOK levels? Can we do that? Because is it that every question that we are given, if it is aligned to a particular DOK level, then we can't use that question anymore? We have to throw it aside and go for another question. Let's talk about it. Can we modify questions to suit particular DOK levels? Share with me in the chat. Anything else? Anything yet in the chat, Ms. Johnson? Can we modify tasks to suit different DOK levels?
So we're waiting. I think they're thinking about the questions.
All right.
And still waiting on persons to respond. And the question asked is, can tasks be modified to reflect a particular DOK level? That's the question on the board, colleagues. Let's get your brief thoughts, your brief responses in the chat. Ms. Hutchinson is saying yes. Lakeisha. Mrs. Daly, yes. That same way we would for different learning styles. All right, let's see. Mrs. Barrett is saying yes. Mrs. Lewis Barrett is saying yes.
All right, great. And you would have seen that in
yes,
terms of how we have navigated this presentation so far. All right, so what do we need to know though, as we try to modify our task? How are the tasks developed? So we're going to take you through a series of steps. So the first one is that we must be able to identify the objectives that are being assessed. And remember, the tasks that we select or the assessments or the activities that we select, they are definitely tied to our objectives. So we must pay keen attention to that. So we have to look at the objectives carefully, look at the content, complexity, and the context of the objective to be able to create an effective task to meet that objective. So then we can go ahead and list the skills and evidence that will elicit students' understanding of the objectives being identified. In other words, what skills will they need to demonstrate? What do we want them to demonstrate? All right, their knowledge of. And then we can brainstorm possible scenarios. And the scenarios, tell me what, when I say brainstorm possible scenarios, that alone, is that looking at the content, complexity, or context? Type for me in the chat. When I say brainstorm possible scenarios, that will allow students to demonstrate these skills and evidence. Am I talking about the content? Am I talking about the complexity, or am I talking about the context? What are they saying in the chat, Ms. Johnson?
Not seeing any
Brainstorm.
responses yet.
All right,
Still
brainstorm
waiting.
possible scenarios. Just the idea of possible scenarios, what is that relating to? Content, complexity, or context?
Hutchinson is saying content. That's Lakeisha.
Okay.
Not seeing
Possible
anything else
scenarios.
yet.
Possible scenarios, you know, you
Those
want to find
persons-
situations in which they can demonstrate their knowledge. So you're putting them in different situations that they can demonstrate this knowledge. What do
So-
we call that?
Lindo is saying context.
Context. Context indeed. Thank you so much. All right. So we want to put, we're trying to create the task, we're looking at the steps, all right? And then we're going to use task formats to build questions to engage students with the scenario. And we can choose different formats if we want to give a worded problem, or they have diagrams, or, you know, different formats that we can use to display the question, and then determine the range of possible students' responses to the question. This is also a critical component to examine, because we want to see, especially for multiple choice items, we kind of would like to set our responses in such a way that we know what the students' responses usually are like, and we can tell if they have a certain level of understanding based on their responses. So we could also look to see if students do not understand this item fully, then they're going to make this error. And that error is placed as one of the multiple choice items. So when students respond to that item, we can tell clearly that, or at least for the most part, that they would have selected that choice because they made a particular error. And so we can make adjustments to that when we teach, you know, but we know the errors that students normally make. We have an idea of their way of thinking, and we need to factor that into the assessment as we try to ascertain to what extent they have understood what was taught. And then we share, review, and revise. That's something critical that we have to do. You know, we don't just keep our assessments to ourselves and say, okay, this is my assessment and I think it's perfect and I'm going to give it to my students. No, share it with your colleagues. Say, you know, I wrote this test, it's a grade 2 item, and I'm thinking, because it's good to create items for yourself, not always just taking from books and so on, but based on what you would like students to demonstrate, you can create your own task or item. And you could share that with your colleague to say, this is what I came up with, what do you think? Or you could test the item with students as well. See what errors they would have made, or where it might be a little ambiguous. It doesn't completely say what you're thinking, or it doesn't completely test the objective that you had intended for it to test, and so on. So it's always good to share, review, and revise so that you can go back and make your edits. Because at the end of the day, the results that we achieve from our students is going to give us the information based on what they were asked to demonstrate. So if the question is flawed, not achieving the objective, then the responses that the students give to that question will also not give you an idea as to whether or not the objective that it was intended to test was actually met. All right. So it might seem like a lengthy process, but it's a critical process that must be undertaken to create effective items for testing. All right. So as we looked at before, we can line these up. And we see we're looking at the objectives at different DOK levels. And we looked at the same objective and the different items. And we would have looked that this was a DOK 1 version, same objective, that was the DOK 2 version, same objective, that's testing at DOK 3. So indeed, we can modify objectives to suit the different DOK levels, not objectives. We can modify questions to suit the different DOK levels. And every level is important. Let me state that here as well. So it's not a case where we want to focus only on DOK 3 for them to demonstrate this wealth of understanding. But at level 1, they're able to demonstrate and to not demonstrate, they're able to define and so on. That's critical, because we must know that they have the basics, the core, but then we continue to build on that. So we also involve them in conducting, in answering level 2 questions, as well as level 3 questions. So we help them to graduate in that process. All right. So I'm asking you now to examine the task below as we prepare to do an activity. Examine the task below, and you're going to create a task at the DO level that is pitched higher or lower than the one that is given. All right. So let's see this task. But before we do that, you're going to identify for me in the chat, which DOK level do you think this task is set at? What DOK level? DOK, is it DOK 1? Would you say it's DOK 2? Would you say it's DOK 3? Or would you say it's DOK 4? Which of them would you say this task is pitched at? All right, I'm waiting for the chat to light up, Ms. Johnson. Let me know when it does. So I'm going to read the objective. Estimate and calculate the mean of a set of data. Part 1, generate a group of 5 numbers such that the mean and the median are the same. The mode is less than the median. Part 2, describe an example of a situation where this relationship among the mean, mode, and median could occur. Which value would you give the best average in the context given? Do we have any responses in the chat, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, we do. I'm not seeing her name for the first one, but I'm seeing where Cassandra Lewis is saying 3, DOK level 3.
Okay.
Nordia Burke is saying level 3.
Mm-hmm.
No more yet.
Okay. All right. In the interest of time, I'll run with those responses. So
Others
indeed,
are saying 3. Yeah, most persons are saying DOK level 3. Most persons.
Right. Great. So this is a level 3 question. All right, DOK level 3. Level, if it were a higher level than 3, which usually is not done extensively in the schools, but you can do it on a more long-term basis at the end of a term or the end of a month, giving them a certain project that can accumulate, demonstrate the accumulation of the concepts that we have learned over time. But yes, indeed, this is a level 3. So I am asking you now, what would be an example of a level 1 question based on this objective? Estimate and calculate the mean of a set of data. Any responses?
Not yet, not yet.
All right, just an example of what? What would a level 1 question testing the same objective look like to you? All right. Any responses?
I'm seeing what is the median in the group of numbers.
Okay. Relatively straightforward. Okay.
Not seeing anything else.
All right. All right. So in the interest of time, let's look at what a possible response could be. This is not the only level 1 version of a question, but let's see an example. So let's see level 1. Find the mean, median, and mode of the following set of numbers. All right. So that's simple enough. I know the objective said mean, but the original question also included all three. So we'll just extend it to that at the moment. But in this particular case, we're asking them to do something pretty straightforward. In order to find the mean, they know the procedures. To find the mean, they know what the median is and how to find it. So it's really just based on the definitions that they would have been given and reproducing what they would have known in relation to that. All right. So that's the one below. So our task was set at level 3. So we're looking at a task below that. So that would have been DOK 1. All right. Any ideas what a DOK 2 would possibly look like? What could a DOK 2 version of this look like? No responses? Yeah, it would take a lot of typing, I imagine. But let's look at what it could possibly look like. All right. So the mean of the following set of numbers is 4.63. What are the new mean and median when the modal data is removed? All right. So in other words, a little notch above level 1, where they're given the mean, and then they will have to do something now based on their knowledge and understanding of what the mode and the median are. All right. So removing, of course, they're going to subtract and so on. So it's a lot more involved than basic recall and reproduction. They're actually going to be using their skills based on the concepts that they would have here. So it's a basic example, but the idea really is that if you go out and you're looking for, let's say, a question that meets a particular objective, and you would like to have a level 2 question, you know, in your task or your assessment for your students, you can look at that question and say, okay, based on the objective, I would like it to be a level 2. So I can modify this aspect of the task so that it will reflect more of a level 2. All right. And you can up it as well. So if the task that you identified is more of a level 1, then you can modify that task to make a level 2 version or a level 3 version. And it's very important to do that, because at the primary level, the level 3 version of questions are usually set as performance tasks, you know, where students have to know they're given a broad context. They're at a park, they're at an amusement park, and they have this amount to spend, and they're going to be going on this ride and that ride, and they have X amount of money, and they charge this amount for so on. So, you know, different aspects of performance tasks that they can examine. They're in a supermarket and they're going to be purchasing items for a class party or a birthday party, and you know, so all of these concepts that they would have learned in terms of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and all of these are now placed into that context, which is a real life scenario that they have to interface with at some point, and they would have to now utilize those skills and concepts that they would have learned to be able to do that. So for our purposes, in order for us to help our students, not just at the grade 6 level, but at grade 1, at grade 2, at grade 3, at grade 4, at grade 5, we can expose them to various tasks at the different levels as we seek to prepare them to be able to do well on performance tasks as well. And the thing I like about these performance tasks as well is that it puts everything together in context for them to be able to appreciate the content that they have been taught, you know? And so it's good for every grade level that students are exposed to these little DOK 3 type questions for them to really construct their understanding and prepare themselves to solve future problems. All right. So let's briefly review what we have looked at. We have looked at content, and this is what students are required to learn. We have looked at complexity, and that's how deeply they should understand the content. And we have looked at context, and that is what should students be able to do with this content? All right. So we also look briefly at Webb's depth of knowledge, where we look at level 1, the OK level 1, which we refer to as recall, basic recall and reproduction. Level 2 is where we would like them to demonstrate certain skills and concepts. Level 3, we define as strategic thinking, where they're able to use more of the skills to solve the problems without necessarily just basing it on simple recall. They have to have a thorough understanding of the concepts. And level 4, extended thinking, where we take it out of the classroom into different contexts for the most part, so that they can apply an amalgamation of the concepts that they would have been exposed to. And we get a chance to see them demonstrating these skills, which is so beautiful when they're able to do that. All right, so we're going to prepare to share the link to our session evaluation in the chat, or you could scan here to complete our evaluation form, because at the end of every session, we want to make sure that we have met your need or to identify how we can further assist you. All right, so we're inviting you to complete the evaluation of our session, and if we have not yet done so, we're about to place that evaluation link in the chat. All right, and if not, and you're able to scan, it has been placed in the chat. All right, great. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Or you can scan here and complete our evaluation form. All right. Thank you so much for being a part of this session. You have been very patient and you have been with us, and we're praying and hoping that the session was indeed useful for you. All right. So this brings us to the end of today's session, and we're looking forward to seeing you implementing all of what we have shared in your schools. Thanks again. Please don't leave until you have clicked on that evaluation form link and you have completed the form. All right, thank you so much. Any final words, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, just to say, I also placed the link for the YouTube. It's in the chat, somewhere in the chat. I'll have to probably look for it again. But I did put it in the chat where you could, yes, it's right there. Let me see if I can reshare it.
All right, for the YouTube link, right?
Right.
So you can rewatch the video.
Oh dear.
All right, so thanks again, and continue to complete our evaluation form. All the best, everybody. Bye-bye. All right, so our presenters were Ms. Itanya Johnson and Mrs. Janice Simpson Hales. All right, we're hoping you are all able to click on that link. We are going to be ending the meeting now. If you have not yet clicked on the link, please do so, because we're going to end the meeting now. Thank you so much.